Hello everyone, I am the storyteller. Tonight I'll tell you a story of creeping dread and unraveling reality and experience. Dr. Elias Finch would never forget after agreeing to investigate the ruins of a drowned town revealed by drought. Relax, listen to the hum beneath the silence, and discover what happened when the ground remembered what was buried. I dug it out of the mud with my bare hands, not in a frenzy, not yet, but with a careful urgency, like I already knew what I would find. I'd spotted the edge of it, bone white against the black silt, protruding from the cracks like a root pushing out from some deeper stratum of memory, a flute, hand-carved, polished, smooth by time and pressure. My fingers trembled before I touched it, not from cold. It was 91 degrees and windless. But something older than fear, recognition. I turned it over, the same notch on the mouthpiece, the same worn twine looped through the bottom. It shouldn't exist. My grandfather used to describe it, vaguely, mostly when drunk. But I assumed he'd dreamt it or read about it somewhere in his old books. But here it was in my hand, half a mile into what used to be the middle of Lake Orla, now jagged, steaming scar across the western basin. I looked around, no one, no sound. The silence of the place was unnatural, the kind that presses against your ears like you're submerged. The sky was gray and low, not with clouds, but with ash haze from the wildfires out east. The sun hung like a blister behind it. The buildings of old Orla, once drowned, now jutted from the lake bed like broken teeth. Roofs slanted at odd angles, wood warped and blackened. Bricks peel like burnt skin. The church spire still stood, but tilted, and I swear it hadn't been there yesterday. I pocketed the flute and told myself I was just here to observe, to document. But something about this town already knew my name. My rental car could only take me so far. After that I hiked. What used to be water was now thick clay and salt-dusted stone, baked hard where the sun hit and sucking wet beneath the surface. Each step felt like a trespass. Not because of any superstition, but because it was clear I wasn't supposed to be here yet. The ground hadn't finished settling. Trees once submerged now loomed bare and twisted, barkless, bleached skeletons that rattled in the wind. I'd grown up hearing about old Orla. Stories passed town in pieces, always avoiding the center. My grandfather, James Finch, was one of the last to leave before the dam sealed it off in 1937. He never said why, just that the town had gotten too strange for God. I always assumed that was an old man's melodrama. But now, walking past a caved-in schoolhouse and what looked like a collapsed root cellar full of bones, I wasn't so sure. There was a name for the kind of silence I felt here. Aphonic silence, the total absence of ambient sound, where the air seems too thick for echoes. The birds didn't come here, neither did the insects, just the wind and the occasional creak of structures realigning in the heat. It was like the town was exhaling. I was staying in a ranger's shack about 2 miles from the edge of the ruins. It wasn't much. Cot, stove, generator, no cell signal. But it was enough. I wasn't here for comfort. I was here because someone at the state university thought it would be interesting to send a folklorist to catalog the reemergence of a submerged town, now exposed by the worst drought in recorded history. What they didn't know was that my grandfather's journal, unread for decades, had started to make sense again. The symbols he sketched, the phrases in forgotten dialects The map he drew from memory, not of the streets, but of what lay under them. That first night in the shack, I sat on the porch watching the sun die behind the ridge, and I heard it, not the flute, not yet, just a low, rhythmic tone, distant and distorted like a bell, but drawn out, warped. I waited for it to stop. It didn't. It faded into the wind. I chalked it up to shifting metal, debris contracting in the evening chill. I told myself I was tired, that this place played tricks, but I didn't sleep. Instead, I read his journal by flashlight. I had tried before, many times, but it had never made any damn sense. He'd written like a man afraid of what he might say next, and finished sentences, repeated phrases, nonsense words. But tonight, for the first time, I felt like I could follow him. They don't stay in the houses after sundown, not since the ground started talking, not words. Shapes. You see them if you close your eyes long enough. It went on like that, the same 5 houses mentioned again and again. The old church, the well behind the post office, the basement of the clinic, places to avoid, things to never say out loud, and the phrase he wrote more than a dozen times. The town gave it to us, the lake only took it back. That night I dreamt of being underwater, not drowning, not floating, buried, eyes open, mud packed in every orifice, something above me, pacing, waiting. When I woke, my fingernails were packed with black grit, and the inside of my mouth tasted like river rot. I didn't mention the flute to anyone, not yet. Partly because I didn't want to answer the obvious questions. Why I was digging in the first place. Why I'd gone alone into a restricted zone. Why my own damn research seemed more like a compulsion than a choice. But mostly, I didn't say anything because part of me wasn't sure it was real. It sat on the table in the shack that morning, still damp with lake bed slime. Its surface had dried to a cracked, ivory texture that looked like fossilized wood, though it was clearly bone, maybe elk or deer, maybe something older. The carvings on the side weren't decorative. They were symbols, glyphs, half forgotten, half invented. Some of them matched what my grandfather had drawn in his journal. The flute made a noise when the wind hit it, a high, keening sound like a child's whistle pulled to tight. I turned it over again and again, running my thumb across the notches until I could feel them in my skin. The shape wasn't symmetrical. There were 5 finger holes, but not in any playable order. It was made to hum, not sing. A knock at the door broke the trance. I jumped, nearly knocked over the oil lamp. The man standing outside had a badge on his chest and a hat 2 sizes too big for his head. Thin face, ropey frame, eyes too far apart. He didn't look surprised to see me. "Dr. Finch," he said. "That's right. I'm Sheriff Caldwell. Heard you were poking around the old town. Just wanted to check in. Make sure you weren't, straying too far from dry ground." His voice had the smoothness of someone used to lying gently and often. "I'm sticking to the perimeter," I lie, "just documenting the structural decay and collecting photos." "You find anything strange?" He asked it so casually it threw me off. "Not anything important. Not anything dangerous, strange." "Not yet," I said. "Just ghosts." He grinned without humor. "Well, there's plenty of those." I waited, but he didn't move, just stared at me. Then his eyes flicked over my shoulder, toward the table, toward the flute. "You know, he said. We used to find things like that every few years. Washed up on shore, kids would bring them to school. One girl got sick, wouldn't stop screaming. Said she saw her father in the well, even though he'd been dead since she was 6. My mouth was dry, and the objects. He looked me dead in the eye. We burned them. Later that afternoon, I returned to the ruins. The sun was merciless. Heat shimmered off the stone foundations like smoke. The lake bed cracked underfoot. A brittle web of failure lines etched deep into the earth. As I passed the skeleton of what had once been the Orla General Store, I saw the footprints. Fresh to fresh, not mine, not booted, bare, toes spread wide, heel deep, adult-sized, human. They walked in a straight line through the mud toward the old church. A skeletal frame of stone and timber that leaned unnaturally westward. I'd scouted it the day before from a distance. It hadn't stood upright then, but now the bell tower, fractured and hunched, seemed taller, more intact. As I approached, something about the church felt off. The doors were gone, the interior dark and wet-smelling. But it was more than that. It felt like it had been waiting for me. Inside, the floorboards were half-rotted, half gone. Shafts of light cut through gaps in the rafters, revealing a central aisle choked with old pews. There were objects scattered on them, offerings, almost stones, bits of twine, scratched bones, a doll's arm on the altar, a box. I don't know why I opened it. I knew I shouldn't. Inside were teeth, human, arranged in the shape of a ring. All molars, a string of them, threaded like beads. A sound rose behind me. Not a voice, not a breath, a tone, long and low, like someone blowing across the mouth of a bottle the size of a house. It vibrated in my skull. In my spine, I turned. No one. I stepped out into the sun again, heart pounding. I didn't realize until later that I had taken the ring of teeth. That night I dreamt I was standing in the church, but it wasn't ruined. It was pristine. The pews were polished. The candles were lit. There were people inside, maybe 20, all standing, all silent. All turned away from me. At the front stood my grandfather. He was holding the flute. He raised it to his lips. And then nothing, no sound, no breath. Just a pressure that caved my ribs inward and filled my ears with static. When I woke up, the flute was beside me on the cot. I hadn't brought it inside. The next morning, the air felt wrong. Not just hot or stale, stagnant, like everything had stopped moving except for me, the kind of stillness that makes you instinctively whisper. I stepped outside the shack, blinking at the hard light. Something had changed overnight. The church tower was gone, not collapsed, gone, where it had stood just yesterday, a blackened tooth on the lake bed. There was now only cracked mud and sun-bleached rubble. Like it had never existed at all, I stood there for minutes, maybe longer, trying to reconcile the image in my head with the sight before me. Had I dreamt it all? The bell, the altar, the ring of teeth? No, because the teeth were still on my knit-stand. They hadn't turned to dust. They hadn't disappeared with the tower. I picked them up and held them to the light. They were smooth, worn. The string that held them together was old leather, stained dark with something I chose not to test. That was when I started hearing it again. The low hum, too deep to be whine, too steady to be anything natural. It was coming from the ground, or maybe under it. like the lake bed had a voice now, and it had remembered how to use it. I followed it, not consciously. My body moved before I made the decision. My boots crunched across the cracked sediment, past half-buried fence posts and the shell of the old post office. I passed the general store again. This time the front door was swinging open, though I could have sworn it had been jammed shut before. Inside, rows of rusted shelving leaned inward like ribs collapsing in a long dead chest. Something scuttled deeper in the dark. I didn't look. I didn't need to. I kept walking until I reached the well. It wasn't marked on any modern maps, but I recognized it from my grandfather's notes. The listening place, he called it, a stone ring half swallowed by earth, its mouth sealed with warped planks and a rusted metal grate. The air around it shimmered. I stood over it. My skin crawled. The sound was louder here. Not just the hum now, but something beneath it. Something with rhythm, like breath. I leaned down, and for just a moment, I heard a voice, not in my ears, in my skull. "You came back late, Elias." I staggered back, nearly falling. My name, it said my name. There was no one around. I ran. Back at the shack, the generator was dead. No hum, no light. I tried the radio. Nothing but static. My phone still had no service. I hadn't noticed how quiet the place had gotten until I tried to make a noise. Even my own footsteps sounded muffled, like the world had been layered in damp wool. I went back to the table and stared at the flute. I hadn't touched it since yesterday. I didn't want to, but my hands were already moving. I raised it to my lips. I didn't blow. I didn't need to. The instant the opening touched my mouth, a sound escaped. Not a note, not music, but a memory. Something pulled from me and pushed out. My vision blurred. My stomach turned. I saw my grandfather, alone in a stone basement, crying. I saw a door covered in chains, something knocking from the inside. I saw fire. Then I was on the floor, gasping. The flute was gone. The door was open. And, standing outside, framed by the red dusk light, was a woman I'd never seen before. She looked like someone you might pass in a small town and forget a second later. Nondescript denim jacket, weather-beaten face, auburn hair tied back in a loose knot. But something about her eyes made my throat tighten, like she already knew me. "Name's Miriam," she said. "Thought you might need help." I stared. "Who sent you?" "No one. Just thought I'd stop by. Folks don't usually stay out here long once the wind starts talking." She stepped inside without waiting. The air changed behind her. The scent of scorched grass and something older. Earth that's been turned over too many times. She glanced at the table, at the open journal. "That's your grandfather's." I nodded. She smiled. Kindly. "Then you know, don't you?" "Know what?" "That it wasn't the lake that buried this place. It was what they found beneath it. The water was just the closest thing to mercy the land could afford." The tapping stopped when I turned toward it. Of course it did. There was nothing there. Just empty air, heat waves rippling off the cracked ground, and the distant, half-collapsed silhouette of what used to be the Orla Library. No birds, no wind, just Miriam standing in the doorway behind me like she'd always been part of this place. She sat down like she owned the chair. "I knew your grandfather," she said, like it wasn't a surprise. "James Finch. He wasn't the first to try to map huts under Orla, but he got closer than most. closer than was healthy. I narrowed my eyes. He left in 1937. She shrugged. He came back once, briefly, then he left again. That time for good. That couldn't be true. He'd said he never went back. Not once. You're lying. No, she said, tilting her head. But he was, to protect you, maybe. Or to protect it, I sat. Not because I wanted to, but because my legs suddenly felt too weak to hold me. Something in the room had shifted. The pressure, the temperature, like a deep, slow breath was being held just beneath our feet. What is it? I asked. Her smile vanished. You haven't figured it out yet, she said softly. I thought the dreams would have started by now. They have, she nodded. Then you'll understand soon. Or you won't. And you'll stay here like the rest of them. The rest of who? She stood up. The ones that can't leave. The ones the town won't let go. After she left, without another word, I searched the shack, not for her, for the flute. I hadn't moved it, but it was gone again, the cot, the table, even the crawl space beneath the floorboards. Nothing. Instead, in its place, I found a photograph, black and white, curled at the edges, faded nearly to ghost smoke. It showed 6 men and 2 women standing in front of the church. Not the ruined shell I'd seen, the intact one, tall and freshly built. The photo had to be from the 1890s, maybe earlier. Their clothes were wrong, frontier clothes, stiff collars, long coats, but that wasn't what froze my breath. It was the face in the back row off to the left, half-shadowed, me, or someone who looked exactly like me. Same jaw, same brow, even the same scar under the chin. The one I got falling off my bike when I was 12. I sat down and stared at it until the sky outside turned black. That night I dreamed of the door again, same stone chamber, same chains, but this time something was whispering behind it. I couldn't make out the words. They weren't in English. They weren't in any language I recognized, but they were for me. Of that I was sure. The door pulsed, breathed. I could smell salt, whetstone, smoke, and beneath it all, a copper tang I knew too well. When I woke, my pillow was soaked with blood. Nosebleed, that's all I told myself. But when I looked in the mirror, there was a word scrawled in the condensation across the glass, even though I hadn't turned on the sink or shower. Welcome back. By morning, the generator was still dead. The radio was static. My phone had reset to factory settings without explanation. No contacts, no data. Just a blank screen and the date. October 12th, 1937. I dropped it hard outside. I noticed something else had changed. The well had moved. Not by much, but enough. Maybe 20 feet closer to the shack. Its stone ring looked newer, less sun-bleached. The boards were gone. Just open darkness now, like a mouth hanging open in anticipation. And near it, half sunk in the dust, was the flute. I didn't pick it up. I couldn't. Instead, I walked back inside, locked the door, and sat with my grandfather's journal open on my knees. It had started to make more sense. The madness wasn't in his words. It was in what they tried to keep him from saying. One line was underlined twice. When the drought comes, the town will breathe again. We drowned it to hold the thing beneath. But the roots never died, they just waited for air. That's when the whispering started. Not outside, inside the shack, faint in the corners, in the walls, beneath the floor. and it wasn't in English. But I still understood it. It was saying my name. The whispering didn't stop for hours. It ebbed, changed pitch, moved across the walls like a tide rising and receding in a room that was never dry to begin with. At times it sounded like insects. At others, like the way your name echoes in your own skull just before sleep grabs you by the throat. I tried covering my ears. That made it worse, because it wasn't sound. Not really, it was inside. Eventually, I must have passed out. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up in the dark, cold sweat soaking my shirt, and my left hand clenched around the flute again. This time it was warm. I left the shack before sunrise, guided by a compulsion I didn't fully own. The moon still hung low, pale, dead, and watching. The well was closer again, 10 feet now. No footprints around it, just the sense that something beneath had grown restless, like a dog circling the back door of your mind, waiting to be let in. The entire lake bed had changed overnight, not dramatically, but subtly. The angles were wrong, buildings had shifted, landmarks slightly out of place, like a dream that remembers the shape of a town, but not the specifics. I should have felt fear. Instead, I felt familiarity, like I'd walked this place in sleep my whole life. I reached the foundation of what used to be Orla's medical clinic just after dawn. My grandfather had marked it in his journal. The cold room where they took them after the bleeding. I didn't know what that meant, not yet. The place was more intact than I'd expected. The lower floor was half buried in mud, but the front door frame stood upright, and the tile floor inside had only begun to buckle. I stepped over the threshold and immediately felt the temperature drop. The air here was wrong, heavy, still, as if even decay had forgotten this place. The back of the clinic held a row of rusted gurneys and what looked like a makeshift morgue. Sheet metal tables, warped cabinet doors. Carved into the wall behind them were glyphs, dozens, not scratched, but pressed into the surface with precise, brutal force. They pulsed when I looked at them, the same symbols from the flute. A wave of nausea hit me, and I staggered. That's when I saw it, a mirror, half covered in grime, hanging crooked on the far wall. My reflection blinked before I did. I froze, stared. The image, me, stood perfectly still, head tilted. Then it moved again, out of sync, mouth open, spoke, but no sound came out. Behind it, in the mirror, something stepped into frame, too tall, too thin. Its hands were on my shoulders. Before I turned, I ran. Didn't look back. Didn't stop until I collapsed outside near the road that led back toward the shack. My lungs felt like stone. My eyes burned. The morning light had changed again. More yellow now, sour and bruised. Miriam was there, sitting on the hood of my car like she'd been waiting all night. "You saw it, didn't you?" she said. I don't know what I saw. She didn't answer, just nodded toward the back seat. There was someone inside. I opened the door and stared in. The figure slumped across the seat looked familiar, wrong, but familiar, waxy skin, like a waterlogged corpse. Gray eyes, lips slightly parted, dried blood beneath the nose, hands folded in its lap. A NAMA tag pinned to the coat. Dr. Elias Finch. I stumbled backward, bile rising in my throat. Miriam didn't look surprised. "They found your body in 37-2, she said. Said you died of exposure. No one asked how you got there or why your heart was missing. I turned to her, my voice hollow. What is this? Some kind of experiment? A trick? Time loop? Simulation? Her eyes darkened. She didn't blink. No, Elias, this is inheritance. Back in the shack, the journal had flipped open to a page I had never seen before. Fresh ink. It wasn't my grandfather's writing. It was mine. If you're reading this, stop. The door only opens for those who knock twice. And below it, you've already knocked once. I didn't sleep that night, not even the kind where your body rests, but your mind wanders into darker halls. There was no rest anymore, only the silence between the whispers, and the weight of something beneath the earth shifting toward the surface. The flute wouldn't let me throw it away. I tried, hurled it deep into the salt flats, watched it vanish into the cracked mud. When I got back to the shack, it was sitting on the table, dry, clean, waiting. By noon, I knew I had to go back to the well. Not because I wanted to, because I needed answers, and every lie I'd told myself was beginning to dissolve under the heat of this place. A town unburied, a body that wore my face, a journal writing itself in my hand. The walk took less time than it should have. The ground felt smoother now, familiar, as if Orla was reshaping itself around my footsteps. The well was closer again. It was now within 10 feet of the shack. A stone throat that had no bottom, breathing heat instead of cold. I could hear the whispers without leaning over now. They were clearer, and they knew my name. Knock again. I brought the flute, not because I intended to play it, but because something told me would open the door. I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean there is a door under Orla. My grandfather wrote about it in half-mad fragments. It wasn't built by hands. It isn't made of stone or wood. It waits beneath the town like a seed waits for rain. A place older than the church, older than the settlers, older than the language we use to call things by name. I didn't understand what that meant until I got close to the well again and felt the ground shift. It was subtle, a pressure change, the same feeling you get before a nosebleed or a blackout, like something pressing on the world from below. I stood at the edge, flute in hand. The wind died. The whispers stopped. For a moment, the world held its breath, and I knocked twice. The ground groaned, not like thunder, not like earth, like wood under stress, like hinges, like something had heard me. A crack split the air behind me. I turned and saw the ground open, not collapse, not break, open. A circle of mud peeled back like a hatch being lifted. Beneath it, stone steps, carved smooth, spiraling downward into perfect darkness. I didn't choose to descend. My legs moved. My hand clenched the flute so tight it left grooves in my palm. My breath thinned with each step, and the air smelled like old water and scorched hair. Down, 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 until the light above me disappeared, and still the stairs continued. After what felt like an hour, I reached the bottom. There was a room, circular, walls too smooth, too perfect to be natural. No seams, no tools could have shaped this. The ceiling curved inward, forming a dome, and the center, a stone slab, and on the slab, a body, not decayed, not mummified, preserved. It was me again, but older, eyes open, staring, mouth moving, no sound. I stepped closer. My lips formed the words slowly. It wears us to learn to leave, Then a third eye opened in the center of the corpse's forehead. Not metaphor, not mystic, a wet, blinking real eye. And in that instant I knew it had been watching me through every dream, every hallucination, every memory. It didn't just want me to see it. It wanted me to become it. I screamed, fell backward, crashed into the wall. The room trembled. The stone pulsed beneath me, a single, massive heartbeat. And in that moment, I remembered what Miriam had said. You've already knocked once. This was the second. The third would open something no one could close. Back in the shack, though I don't remember returning, Miriam was waiting. Only this time, she wasn't alone. Old man Thorne sat across from her, the hermit who lived in the hills. I'd heard about him from locals. A survivor, a recluse, said to be older than he looked. He didn't speak at first, just watched me. Finally, he said, "You remember yet?" My voice was dust. "Remember what?" He leaned forward, eyes like dry wells. "That you were the first one to let it out." I wanted to deny it, to say I'd never been here before, that this place, Orla, the well, the flute, had only entered my life days ago. But the more I looked at old man Thorne, the more the memories itched behind my eyes like scabs trying to peel. "You're mistaken," I said, my voice hollow. "No, son," Thorne said, and his tone wasn't cruel, just tired. "Mistaken's when you take the wrong road. You built the damn road." I looked to Miriam for help. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at me with that same expression. Not pity, not fear, recognition. "You helped them dig," Thorne continued. "Back then, you and the others thought it was just soul, just secrets. Thought there was no such thing as to deep." "I'm 37 years old," I snapped. "I wasn't even born when Orla was flooded." He shrugged. "Ain't talking about this time. Talking about the first one. You always come back. Always think you're someone new. You wear yourself like a fresh shirt and forget how many stains it's got underneath." I stood too fast. The walls of the shack swam around me. My pulse hammered in my ears. "This is a trick," I said. "A game or a psychological trap, maybe. An illusion. This is what they wrote about, isn't it? Hallucinations, temporal echoes, identity breakdown." Thorne didn't flinch. "You think that thing below is we're in your face just to mess with you," he said. "No, it ain't copying you, you're copying it. You don't remember because it won't let you, because if you did, you wouldn't come back, and it needs you to come back." Miriam finally spoke, quiet, cold, because it doesn't know how to leave on its own. "I left the shack. I didn't tell them goodbye. I didn't take the flute, but I knew, even as I walked out, that it would be waiting for me." The ground around Orla had changed again. It was subtle at first. A building I passed twice that should have been a mile apart. A mailbox that had grown vines despite nothing else living. A horizon that shifted when I blinked, like a dream reorganizing itself mid-thought. But by the time I reached the bell tower, now inexplicably upright again, the sky had changed. It wasn't just the light. The clouds had stopped moving, frozen in place. Like a painting, the wind had gone utterly still, and the sun hung low, unmoving, locked at the same painful angle for over an hour. Time wasn't behaving anymore, and neither was I. I found myself standing in front of the post office, or what remained of it. My grandfather had mentioned the well behind it, the second well, smaller, hidden. I stepped around the corner, and there it was. A thin stone ring, half covered by dry brush. No cover, no rope. I looked down. There was no bottom, but there was a sound. Not the whispers this time, a heartbeat, and it wasn't mine. I dropped a rock in, waited, nothing. Then, movement, not below, behind me. I turned, expecting wine or deer or nothing. Instead, a child, barefoot, wearing a tattered wool dress, face smudged with mud, hair matted, eyes wrong, too wide, too clear. She pointed to the well. "You let it in," she said. I didn't. "Yes, you did," she said calmly. "Last time, before the water came, you let it in and you watched. And now it wants out. Who are you?" But she didn't answer. She just turned and walked into the ground. Not into the brush or into a hole, into the dirt. The earth rippled like fabric, and she sank without resistance. Gone. I ran. I didn't know where. I didn't remember how long, but I ended up back at the shack. Night had fallen, or maybe it hadn't. Maybe the sun had just gone out. The flute was on the porch, wet, covered in soil, as if it had been buried. And someone had dug it up again. The door was open. Inside, the journal had another new entry, my handwriting. The door opened once. The second knock was the lie. The third is the return. And beneath it, something I hadn't written, scratched, not with pen, but gouged into the wood. Knock, knock. The final scene of this chapter unfolds with Elias staring into the mirror, unsure if it is still reflecting him or something else that has started to move when he doesn't. Behind him, unseen by the narrator, but clear in the reflection, the door has reappeared. Not the shack's door, the one from the dream, stone, sealed, throbbing, and something behind it smiles. The door stood in my mirror, not behind me, not in the room, just in the reflection. A slab of stone fitted with blackened hinges and bound with rusted chains. It had no right to exist here, not in a shack built in 1974. Not inside a reflection, not in this reality. I didn't turn around. I knew it wouldn't be there if I did. That was the worst part. The mirror wasn't showing another place. It was showing the place beneath, the space under what we call real. Under Orla. Under me, the chains pulsed. One of them was missing. I sat in the dark for hours. Maybe longer. Time didn't behave anymore. The sky was stuck in a state of permanent twilight with no stars and no moon, just a smear of dull amber that never brightened, never faded. The only light came from the journal, now glowing faintly at the edges like it had soaked up something radioactive. I opened it. More pages had filled themselves in. The handwriting was mine, but not angular, slanted, impatient. We did not bury it. We fed it. Every generation. The bones of children, the guilt of the town. The men in coats and badges gave it names, called it psychic trauma, called it mass hysteria, called it classify, but it never needed names. It just needed mouths. A memory rose, one that didn't belong to me, and yet I felt it in my nerves like an old injury. I was 16, wearing a different name, standing with 5 others in a circle of ash and salt. Beneath us, a vibration, the kind you feel before an earthquake. A priest, not a priest, was whispering the same word over and over again. Sol-V DH Sol-V DH double quotes. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew what we were doing. We were feeding it. I screamed and flung the journal across the room. The pages stayed open midair for a second longer than physics allows. Then they fell. When I stepped outside, the landscape had changed again. It was subtle. It always was. The trees were closer. The ridge that should have been 5 miles away now loomed 100 yards off. The well was inside the porch fence now, like it had grown legs and shuffled up beside me while I slept. I stared into it. I saw my reflection, not the one from the mirror. This one blinked in time with me, moved in sync, but it grinned when I didn't, and then it winked. I turned and walked toward the heart of old Orla, back into the lakebed ruins, past the post office and the clinic and the general store with its twisted iron shelves. The town was reforming around me, becoming itself again. I saw lights now, pale, lantern-like glows in the upper windows of buildings that should have been empty for 90 years. I heard singing, children's voices, wordless, circular, something closer to keening than music. I kept walking. My body didn't resist. The church was waiting for me, upright again, whole but not repaired, remembered, like the land had brought it back from memory. The bell tower was black against the sky. The doors were open. Inside, silence. The pews were full. Every seat occupied by a version of me, younger, older, sick, scarred, shot, burned, dead, dying. Not statues, not visions. Possibilities. They turned when I entered, in perfect unison, and they all spoke the same phrase together. You were the first sin, the breach in the shell. You walked it through the skin of the world. I backed away. The doors behind me had closed. Up near the altar, a third door waited. Stone, sealed, the same one from the mirror, except this one had only one chain left, and the flute, my flute, was resting in a hollow in its center, a key. I didn't want to touch it, but I already had, in another life, another loop, another guilt-worn cycle of forgetting. My fingers closed around it. The stone groaned. The chain snapped. The door opened. What I saw behind it was not describable in human language, but I'll try. It had shape, but not form. It had eyes, but they saw through time, not light. It had me inside it, curled and screaming, not dead, not living, used. And then it looked at me, and every version of myself screamed in unison inside the church. All the pews collapsed into ash. I fell to my knees. I spoke a name I didn't know I knew. Salved. It wasn't a prayer. It wasn't a curse. It was permission. When I woke up, if I woke up, I was back in the shack. The door opened, the wind returning, but the mirror now showed only dirt, as if the world had buried me, or maybe I was never here at all. It rained for the first time in 87 days, but not over the region, just over Orla, a localized storm, the kind they say isn't possible. Satellite maps would show clear skies for miles, but above the re-emerged town, a black cloud churned like a wound refusing to close. The rain wasn't water, not entirely. It smelled like brine and iron, thick with a coppery tang of blood. When I stepped outside the shack, every inch of me knew something irreversible had happened. I could feel it in my teeth, in my spine, in the weight of my name inside my skull. Too loud, too sharp. The door had opened. I had opened it, and something had stepped out. The town no longer obeyed its own shape. Roads looped back into themselves. Buildings stood in places they hadn't the day before. The well had disappeared entirely in its place. A hole, no bricks, no frame, just a clean bore into the earth, pulsing with breath. And the people had returned. Not visitors, not living, not anymore. They stood on porches behind shattered windows, in rows along the street, mud-slicked skin, empty eyes, all of them watching, not moving, waiting. Some of them had my face. Miriam found me at the base of what used to be the town schoolhouse. She looked thinner now, washed out, like the storm had been draining her. But her voice was steady. It's preached, she said. Not just here, not just now. I didn't ask how she knew. I didn't need to. It's leaking into everything. Thought took form, and now forms unmaking thought. I didn't mean to. I stopped. Because I did, a part of me had always meant to. I just hadn't remembered it until it was too late. She nodded. The first breach never really closed. You were its mouthpiece. The town is the echo. It's how it learns, how it travels. I looked around. The world was warping. Colors felt wrong. Red was too loud, blue too sharp. I saw sounds, tasted them. My skin pulsed with other people's memories. The rain hit me in syllables. A shape emerged from the hole. No footsteps, no splash, just rising. Not human, not beast, not nameable. I recognized it only by what it unmade, where it moved. Identity collapsed. Signs lost their letters. Objects became unfamiliar. I couldn't remember what trees were, or the word for sky. It was deleting the world. Old man Thorne arrived, dragging a rifle that looked more ceremonial than functional. He didn't raise it. I told you, he said, not with anger, but with fatigue. I told you in 1919, and again in 53, and in 88. Every time you came back, you swore you'd remember next time. I stared at him. Why don't you forget? I tried, he said, but someone had to stay awake. Someone had to bury the bones right. You think they stay down on their own. Behind him, more figures emerge. Locals, some living, some dead, some between. A circle was forming. Miriam stood at the center. It needs a vessel again, she said. It's tasted too much of you to stay sealed. But it still has rules, rituals. One of them is choice. What choice? I asked. Her expression didn't change. You go back in. One more time, all the way, no forgetting. You take it with you. You become the lock. And if I don't, the thing from the hole took another step forward. The sky bent. Reality screamed, and I understood. If I didn't, the town would become the first Kate. Not the only. They prepared the burial in silence. Not in dirt. In words, old symbols were drawn on my skin. In salt, in ash, in blood. They didn't explain them. They didn't have to. I already knew them. The flute was handed to me one last time. But I wasn't to play it. I was to swallow it. I didn't protest. It slid down too easily, like it belonged there, like it was coming home. The hole opened wider, not into the ground, into what's beneath understanding. Miriam kissed my forehead. Every world needs a guardian, she said, even the false ones. I stepped into the dark, and it closed behind me. There was no sensation of descent, no falling, no motion, just removal, like I had been peeled away from the surface of reality and placed into a version of it that no longer obeyed logic or memory. The world I entered had rules, but none I recognized. Imagine a corridor shaped like a question you can't answer. Walls made of language that's been forgotten, but not erased. They pulsed gently with the rhythm of my thoughts. Each time I tried to recall who I was, the whole changed. Time wasn't a line here, it was a voice, and it spoke inward. At first I was alone, then I wasn't. I saw her. Not Miriam, her, the first one, the girl from the lake. The one who walked into the dirt. She stood at the end of the corridor with her hands open. A whisper filled the space like steam. It has to be remembered to be bound. She stepped backward into shadow, and the walls melted. Suddenly I was in the past, but not as a memory, as an actor. Orla, 1886. The air smelled like oil and sweat. The town was new, still raw around the edges. Men with pickaxes laughed too loud. The ground hadn't settled yet. Not me, but another version of me, was standing over a sinkhole behind the church, pointing at something in the soil. It goes deeper. I heard myself say there's something under the bedrock. Others gathered. They called me Elias. Of course they did. They thought we were discovering a cave system. We were wrong. We weren't the first to find it. We were just the first to ignore the warnings. The next time the world shifted, it was 1937. The flood day. Sirens blared. People ran with sacks over their shoulders, but no one screamed. That was the worst part. No panic, just resignation. They knew it wouldn't work. The dam was the lie, the official story. A sacrifice made to seal something older. They weren't drowning a town. They were submerging a breach. And at the edge of the water, I saw myself again, younger, wearing a coat I recognized from a childhood photo. And I was smiling. I screamed. The corridor collapsed. Now I was inside the space behind the door. Not symbolic, not metaphor. A real, tactile realm of wrong geometry and humming decay. At the center, the heart, a black coil, miles long, floating in fluid that wasn't liquid. It pulsed when I breathed. My memories peeled away in thin strips the closer I got. My mother's name, the feel of snow, the word for mirror, gone. But the heart pulsed faster, as if hungry, as if waiting. I reached it. It opened, and inside was the version of me that never left. The first Elias, the original breach. He had no eyes, just holes where language had been carved in. He whispered. I let it wear me. Now you must wear me. The heart split, and I stepped in. It was warm, like being remembered after a long absence. And then it sealed. ... When I opened my eyes, I was standing in Orla again. The sky was normal. The sun was rising. The town was gone. Just ruins, bones, dust. No Miriam, no thorn. No well, no storm. Only the wind and a man, unfamiliar, approaching in a park ranger's uniform. You okay? He asked. You're not supposed to be out here. This place has been condemned since the drought uncovered it. I tried to speak, but I didn't remember how. He asked my name. I opened my mouth, and a flute note escaped. The ranger didn't hear the note. He blinked, frowned, looked at me again. You all right? He said, softer now. Do you know where you are? I looked past him. The lake bed had dried again. The mud cracked into puzzle pieces. The skeleton of the town was still visible, but more sunken, more distant, as if the earth had begun swallowing it all over again. But it wasn't the same town. I felt it in the wind. The landscape held new rules now. Something beneath the surface had shifted, rewriting. I'd gone inside the heart, yes, but the heart had also gone inside me. I'm fine, I said, finally, but my voice came out strange, not unfamiliar, just misaligned, like hearing a recording of yourself, but the words are in the wrong order. The ranger seemed to sense it. He hesitated. Don't stay out here long, he muttered. The air's weird, makes folks see things. He turned, walked off toward a trailhead that hadn't existed yesterday. I didn't follow, because I could feel the weather changing again. Not in the sky, but in the memory of the land. Back at the shack, or a version of it, everything was just slightly wrong. The furniture had aged backward. The radio was a 1950s model. The calendar on the wall read April 1973. My notes were gone, but the flute was on the table, clean and dry. I didn't touch it. Instead, I opened the journal. The pages were blank. No blood, no glyphs, no self-writing entries, just one sentence on the first page, handwritten in calm, steady strokes. You have become the boundary. I closed the book. Outside, the wind blew in a circle. Leaves spun upward. Birds flew backward across the sky. Reality was holding, for now, but it wasn't the same. And neither was I. That night, I had a dream, but not mine, yours. Someone else's, a dream of standing on a subway platform deep beneath a city that didn't exist. A woman next to me whispering into her own ear, the train lights never coming, the walls made of old bark. In the distance, a hum, the sound of something folding. And when I turned, every face on the platform was mine. I woke up screaming, but there was no sound in my ears, no echo in the room, just a feeling of presence. I looked to the mirror. It showed the shack behind me, empty still, but just for a moment. In the corner of the reflection, I saw the door again, closed now, sealed, but not locked. A knock just once, at the window, but I didn't move, because that wasn't how the story ended. The heart didn't trap me, it planted me, a new route, a new breach, a new watcher. The final line of the chapter is spoken, or thought, by Elias as he sits in the dark, the world slowly recalibrating around him. This time I'll remember, but I won't stop it. I just want to see what it becomes. It didn't end, it widened. The town was declared permanently inaccessible. Landslide, they said, structural collapse, toxic soil. No mention of the breach, no mention of the second well, no mention of the heart. But people came anyway, drawn in dreams, pulled by shapes in static, patterns and decay, low hums behind closed doors at night, a sound no one could describe, but everyone somehow recognized, the note of the flute they'd never heard. They came with cameras, with maps, with questions. They did not come back. I stayed, not in the shack, not in the ruins, not in Orla. I stayed in the place between, the part that didn't exist before me and won't exist after. You'd call it a hallucination, a fracture, maybe a spiritual pocket, but it's not. It's structure. It's the support beam reality ever knew it needed, a soul in tension stretched across time, holding back what wants to return. I do not sleep. I do not breathe, but I do listen to all of you, because you're dreaming of me now. You've read these words or heard them, and that means the pattern is inside you. The glyphs are crawling under your language, under your thoughts, looking for edges to widen. Every time you misremember a detail, forget a name, feel like you've been somewhere you haven't. That's me. I am the reminder. I am the breath between memories. I am the third knock you haven't heard yet, and the flute. It's not an object. It's a resonance. It's carried on stories, in poems, on lips that move without knowing why. You might hum it in the shower. Hear it in the whine of a dead radio station. Whistle it absently while walking home. And when you do, that's the sound that carried. A classroom somewhere, a child at her desk, quietly drawing in the corner of her notebook. The teacher calls her name. No response. The teacher walks over, looks down. The drawing is of a door made of stone, covered in chains. One of them is broken. The girl looks up, smiles. He's almost remembered, she says, and then he can come back.